So I'd like to begin by seeking the blessings of all the devotees. We can say and discuss something in this short class that can help us all to progress further in Krishna consciousness. So I pray for everyone's blessings. I also thank Nimish Prabhu, who's been very tolerant with me. He's asked me on many occasions to give class, but I've either not been able to or possibly not been willing. So if he's listening, which he said he may do, I thank him. So the topic for today is obviously happiness. Often we go and do university programs and share Krishna consciousness with relatively new people. And happiness is a key theme that we talk about. So we developed a course in the ashram a few years ago called Lifestyle Management. And the first session in this course was the search for happiness. And so one of the key questions in this particular session that we would ask students and other individuals is, what is everyone looking for in life? What are we all really looking for? And sometimes you'd get various answers, but pretty quickly someone would say happiness. And ultimately, that's what we find that the majority of people in life are looking for. They're looking for happiness. So we would tell people, obviously, we would try to put things into perspective for them, explain that this is what the material world is like, this is what your endeavors for happiness are like. But actually, if you come to Krishna consciousness, then you'll be happy. So, of course, this is true. This is true. But it's obviously a lot deeper than that, and obviously that's quite a simplification, and Prabhupada elaborates on this principle of happiness. And actually in this purport it is explaining that you can try to be happy all you like, but you can only be so happy. And obviously it's explained by the laws of karma. I was in a program on Saturday with His Holiness Bhakti Rasamrita Maharaj, who has unfortunately left this morning. But he gave a very powerful class to a group. If anyone knows Sundaranand Prabhu, he's a neurologist, he's a surgeon, and he has a large friendship circle of fellow doctors and lawyers and business people and radio owners. If anyone knows Ravi Sharma of Sunrise Radio, he was at this event on Saturday. So various people who are very successful in their fields. But Maharaj gave a very powerful class. But one of the key contentions that people had in the crowd was on the law of karma. And one person in particular who I spoke to after the event as well was finding it very difficult to accept the fact that his brother, who was a very noble, very honest, very hard-working, very loving individual, had passed away just a year and a half ago, and left a daughter who was 15 months old. So he was trying to accept and come to terms with this fact and was finding it very difficult. So when Maharaj talked about this law of karma, he had many questions. And Maharaj gave a very nice example to explain the law of karma. He gave the example of a silo. So basically the question was being asked, which I often ask on book distribution as well, is, do you ever wonder why good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people? And this is something which people find often difficult to understand and accept. So this man was basically asking, my brother was very good, why did death come upon him? And so Maharaj explained the example to really put things into perspective of a silo. So a silo is basically a massive storage basin. So you put grain in at the top and you take it out at the bottom. So if you have a good crop, then good grain will go in. And if you have a bad crop, then bad grain will go in. So Maharaj was explaining how if you take grain from the bottom, if it was a good harvest, then you'll get good. Then you'll have a good period in your life, or you'll have a good life. But once over time, that good harvest or that good karma will end, will finish. And then, depending on what the next crop was like, if the next year the crop wasn't so good, then that next batch of grain will not be so good. And therefore, in a particular individual's life, their life may not be so positive, or they may go through a negative period. So Maharaj was basically explaining that it's all based on karma, but not just this life, but over many lives. So basically the understanding that to quite some degree our life and the amount of happiness that we can actually obtain in this life is in one sense quite fixed. Prabhupada's father would often explain to him, Prabhupada would talk and explain to the devotees that his father would often say that with your 2 hands, if God is giving you all the happiness in the world, with his 10 hands, how much can you grab onto with your 2 hands? And similarly, if God is taking with his 10 hands, then how much can we hold on to with just our 2 tiny hands? So actually we're powerless to quite some degree to the laws of karma. But what we can do is really prepare for the future. We can really prepare to have a better life, a more positive life. And obviously as devotees we understand that whether it's good karma or whether it's bad karma, it really, we want to be rid of both of them. Because ultimately we want to become detached from the material world. And this attachment to good and bad, Shastra really puts it into perspective. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, in the Madhyam Leela, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami explains, Dvaita Badra Badra Gyan, Sabo Mana Dharma, E Bala E Manda, Sabo E Sab Brahma, E Bala E Manda, E Sab Brahma. So this is good, this is bad, these are all our mental concoctions. This is all illusion. Actually everything is the same in one sense. Everything is it's all material life at the end of the day. And we have to become immune to it. We have to become detached from it. And if we're not able to do that, then we'll continue in this cycle of samsara, we'll continue in this cycle of birth and death. So it really comes down to attachment. And this is really our key problem. There's one day there was a man, and he went to a mental asylum. And he went into the first room of this mental asylum. And he saw a man who was perched on a fan. And he was shouting, Layla, Layla. And he seemed demented. He seemed to be in a very disturbed situation. So he was confused. And he asked the doctor, why is this man so disturbed? Why is he shouting the name of this woman? And he said, he was chasing this woman, Layla, but she married someone else. So since then he's been very disturbed. He's not got over that situation, so he's shouting and praying for her. So then the man went to the next door, and he saw another man who again looked very disturbed, just as disturbed, and he was he was crouching on the sink, and again he was shouting, Layla, Layla. And the man was very confused. 2 people after the same woman? And so he asked, so why is he shouting the same name? And then the doctor explained, this is a man that married Layla. So often we find that we're chasing after situations, but I think we will have the experience that when we actually achieve that situation, it's actually not as positive or as desirable as we thought it was. They say absence makes the heart grow fonder, so when we don't have something, then we really yearn after it. But when we actually achieve it, if it's material in nature, then naturally we understand that it won't fulfill us. And we see in this world, and a question that we can ask ourselves is, do we really want to go back to Godhead? Do we really want to be with Krishna, to serve Krishna? And if we really do, then we'll achieve that aim. Yam yam vapis param bhavam tyajante antakalevaram. So if we really want to go back to Godhead, then this will be pervading our consciousness from minute to minute, from second to second. And then when it does come to the time of death, then we will actually be thinking of Krishna. And naturally, according to this verse, we will return to Krishna. There's an interesting story of Narad Muni. He's talking to Lord Vishnu. And Lord Vishnu one day is feeling very merciful. But he's also very skeptical. He understands the nature of material attachment. So he says to Narad Muni is convinced that there's so many conditioned souls, but so many really want to come back to him. So Lord Vishnu says, okay, Narad Muni, find one person who wants to return and return to Vaikuntha, return back to Godhead. So Narada Muni says, easy, no problem. He's very confident. So he says, I can find someone. So he goes to a farm. Comes to the material world and he goes to a farm. And he finds a student. And he thinks this is a young, bright individual. He'll understand the truth. So Narada Muni preaches to him and he says, and this student is Krishna conscious. He's engaging with the process. And he says to the student, why don't you come back to Vaikuntha? I've got a free ticket. Lord Vishnu is given a free ticket for one person to go back to Godhead. So the student says, well, I'm doing my exams at the moment. So once I've done my exams, I've just got a year and a half left. I I've been working for it. I've already spent a year and a half. So once I finish this, then I'll go back. Is that okay? So Narada Muni says, okay, fine, no worries. So Narada Muni returns to Lord Vishnu. He says, so I've got a student and he's in this farm down there in the US and he wants to come. So give it a year and a half. It's not long, especially in our time. Then he'll come back. So Narada Muni returned soon after his exams were finished. And the student said, yeah, well, I know I promised, but now I've got a girlfriend and we're planning on getting married. So let me get married. I think I need to give her some kids. And then once I've done that, then I think it'll be time, sort of give it a few years. And then I'll return. Then I'll come with you. So Narada Muni says, okay, but you've promised now. So, okay, I'll come back in a few years' time. So the student gets married. He has some kids. And naturally, when he has kids, he realizes that they're very young and he can't leave his wife with the kids by themselves. So when Narada Muni returns to him and the kids are just a few years old, he says, well, I have to wait until they grow older. When they grow older, let them become established. Let me give them a good future. And then I'll return. Then I'll come back with you. So Narada Muni returns and he just gives Lord Vishnu an update. He says, okay, he's getting there. He's getting there. He just needs to sort out a few things and then he'll come back. So Lord Vishnu is sitting there and he's thinking, I know the deal. I know what's happening. So anyway, Narada Muni returns. The student is now growing older. He's had some grandchildren now. So his children have grown older. They've had their own children. And he's nearing 70. And he's just thinking, when Narada Muni returns to him, he's thinking, can't you find anyone else to come back with you? So the grandchildren are growing older, and he basically tells Narada Muni, okay, let me look after these grandchildren. I really want to see them grow older, speak their first words, start walking, and all these kind of things. There's nothing wrong with these things. We're not knocking it too much. But at the end of the day, Narada Muni is getting more and more frustrated with this individual. So as a man is kind of saying, okay, let me just watch these kids grow up, the grandchildren. He falls off the balcony and dies. So because he's so attached to that situation, to that household, he returns as a dog in that same household. And so Narada Muni comes to this dog and says, okay, you lived in this household all your life, and you gave your whole life to this household. Now you're a dog. You can't even speak. You're barking. You have you're engaged in such terrible activities. You pass your stool in the fields. Why don't you return now? You're a dog. What have you actually got? But the dog is so attached, he says, no, I have to look after this household. Often my sons, they leave the household unguarded. So I have to stay here to look after the household, to look after the house. And Narada Muni's just got his hand in his head. So eventually the dog dies and he becomes a snake. And the snake is looking after the treasury in the household. So Narada Muni says to the snake, okay, at least come back now. Now you don't even have legs. Now you're slithering across the ground, which is painful to your body. And the snake says, I have to look after the treasury, such valuable money that I worked so hard all my life. In 2 lives ago, I worked so hard to collect all of this money. I have to look after it. So Narada Muni was so exacerbated with this snake, with this individual, that he called his sons and said, there's a snake in your treasury. And he got his own sons to kill the snake. So the snake, eventually he got the message. This living entity got the message and he returned back. But after such a long such a long situation and interaction. So we understand from this story that the nature of material attachment is so strong, is so deep-rooted. And actually, even as devotees, we can become very attached to our material situations. And Prabhupada talks in his purports about progression in spiritual life and the natural progression of a living entity, how a devotee should progress. And often we find it difficult to take the next step because of the nature of this attachment. We should understand actually that there's no halfway houses. Bhogeshwarya prasaktanam taya parita cheshitam. Vyavyasya buddhi samadao na vidyate. That as long as we're attached to the material world, to material life, we really can't go back to Godhead. We can't have that single-pointed focus and attention to the ultimate goal, which is pure devotional service unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So we've got about 20 minutes. What I really wanted to talk about today, this was a bit of an introduction. The theme that I wanted to talk about is pure devotional service and where pure devotional service comes from. It comes from pure faith, and pure faith comes from a pure seed of devotion. So the Acharyas explained that with a pure seed we can have pure faith. Pure faith sprouts from the pure seed. And from the pure faith only can come pure devotion. So to understand what pure faith is, it's useful when we're defining something, it's useful to understand what it's not. So what is impure faith? And again, the Acharyas give much detail on what impure faith is. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur talks about the nature of impurity. He calls it abhas. So anything with the suffix abhas is impure. So we can refer to impure faith as shraddha, which is faith, abhas, so impure faith. And that's how we'll refer to it. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur splits this impure faith into two. So one is pratibimba and the other is chaya. So pratibimba can be translated to be the reflective semblance of faith. So if we call shraddha abhas a semblance of faith or impure faith. So pratibimba is one and chaya is another type of impure faith. So pratibimba is the reflective impure faith or the reflective semblance of faith. Now the Acharyas explain that this is a very troublesome situation. It's based on an incorrect understanding of the philosophy. It's based on Mayavad philosophy. When you have a distorted conception of what is the goal of life, what is the material world, what situation we find ourselves in. And of course, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu explains that the Mayavad philosophy is very offensive to the Lord, because basically it understands, it has no faith in the eternality of the Lord, his abode, his pastimes, his activities, his friends and associates. And so actually it's very much offensive. And so Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains that this reflective semblance of faith, this pratibimba, is very detrimental for an individual. And it's very difficult for an individual who has such faith to actually get out of that situation because of its very deep-rooted philosophical misunderstanding. So often we find that in our society, devotees, as devotees, we're very critical of an individual who may not be able to follow the four regs or chant 16 rounds and do those very basic things because they're materially attached. Now, but often when we find that devotees have some misconceptions in the philosophy, we're not so critical of that kind of situation. But actually, misconceptions of the philosophy are much worse for the individual and for the devotion. Because if they have a philosophical misunderstanding, it's much more difficult to uproot it. And if they're fixed in that philosophy, if they have strong faith in that philosophy, then eventually they will meander away from pure devotional service. Whereas if someone is materially attached, then through the process of Krishna consciousness, through continuing to practice to whatever degree they can, they're actually purifying themselves and actually getting closer to the pure aim. So actually we understand that having strong faith in something which is incorrect, in an incorrect philosophy, is much worse than having weak faith in the correct philosophy. There are examples, though, where individuals who have this incorrect philosophy have been purified. So we have in Chaitanya Charitamrita, we have two examples, Prakashananda Saraswati and Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, who were both Mayavadi philosophers. However, through the association of the Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they were actually purified and came to pure devotional service. Their faith was purified. Shri Shri Radha Gokulananda ki, Shri Shri Sitaram Lakshman Hanuman ki, Shri Shri Gaur Nitai ki. Okay. But as devotees, this pratibimba, generally we don't see it so much in the circle of devotees. What we see more often is chaya, the shadowy semblance of faith, or the shadowy impure faith. This is basically a situation where an individual is weak at heart, has material attachment, has material desires, and therefore is not able to practice purely. So this situation, although it's not ideal, obviously, it's not as bad, because it's explained that it can be purified. So anything which is tadiya, which is related to the Lord, is very purifying. So we understand that the activities, the places, the pastime places of the Lord, the dham, the persons, the great devotees, association with these things is very purifying. And the process of Krishna consciousness itself, the process of Shravanam, Kirtanam, hearing and chanting, all these things are very purifying. And they allow an individual who has impure faith, but which is not based in philosophical misconception. So one who just has material desires, he can actually be purified of this impurity. And he can come to a situation where his faith is much purer. And we have this example in CC, which talks about the seed of devotion. And the seed of devotion, can anyone say what the seed of devotion is? What is this seed, essentially? Rules and regulations. What was that, Kundapur? Shraddha. Anyone else? What is the seed? So the Acharyas explain that this seed is transcendental knowledge. This transcendental knowledge is imparted by the spiritual master. And now this spiritual master can be Diksha or he can be Shiksha. But this seed of devotion is basically transcendental knowledge. And we can water this seed through the process of Krishna consciousness, hearing and chanting. And through watering the seed, a creeper sprouts. And as we continue watering, the creeper grows. And it grows and grows and grows. Eventually, as we continue watering, it cuts through the material atmosphere and goes into the Vaikuntha planets, and eventually the creeper is understood to take shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord. So this is an example to explain or to picturize the development of our devotion. But we find that the impure seed can develop through three key ways. The Acharyas explain that there's three key ways through which an impure seed can develop. The first is if the transcendental knowledge accepted from the spiritual master is distorted by the individual, if they don't take things as they are. So if they distort the philosophy, if they distort the instruction of the spiritual master, then an impure seed can develop. The second is if the watering of the seed is not complete, or if it's not sufficient. So if our hearing and chanting is not sufficient, if it's not of sufficient quality and of sufficient depth, then we find that the seed this creeper, as it develops and grows, will not achieve sufficient nourishment, sufficient water and nutrients in order to grow. And then again, we find that the creeper may wilt and potentially even die. Never dies, but be covered. And the third problem that the Acharyas explain is that if weeds around the pure creeper are not uprooted, so these material desires, the Acharyas explain, have to be uprooted and these are likened to weeds which grow around the creeper. If they're not uprooted, and rather if they're watered, if we encourage our material desires, if we don't discourage them, then the weeds can smother our creeper, and they can really stem the growth of our creeper, or the growth of our devotion. So this is something to look out for, the Acharyas explain. But we have many examples where this shadowy faith, where this impure faith has been purified through the association of devotees. We have the example of Narad Muni serving the Mahajans, serving the Mahatmas. Through that and taking their remnants, through those two activities, he was purified and he became such an elevated personality. We have the example of Prahlad Maharaj. Does anyone remember who Prahlad Maharaj was in his previous life? So it's interesting that all the stories that we see in Bhagavatam and in the scriptures, there's a deeper story behind it, and the Puranas often have those deeper explanations. So in the Nrsimha Puran, it's explained that Prahlad Maharaj was actually an individual who was engaging in various activities. He was actually with a prostitute one day on the day of Nrsimha Chaturdashi, and he was arguing with this prostitute all day and all night. And so on the day of Nrsimha Chaturdashi, so on this day, he actually inadvertently, he fasted and observed an overnight vigil on this day of Nrsimha Chaturdashi. And through this activity, through this austerity, which was very inadvertent, which wasn't at all intended, he was actually purified. And the Puranas explain that he became Prahlad Maharaj. Now, there may be a deeper story behind that too, but I don't have that. But it shows the potency. These stories help us to see the potency of performing even a little devotional service. And that's what we should understand. So connection with the process of devotion, even inadvertently, is very powerful. We also have the understanding that when we do Harinam, for example, if people come in contact with the holy name, even if they come in contact with it jokingly, if they try to chant, but they do so incorrectly, or if they chant with a mood of joking, even then they're purified. They gain some material they gain some spiritual benefit. Another way that Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains of becoming purified and of really countering our material attachments and material problems is Krishna Lila. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains that he goes through 20 different demons of Vrindavan, and he likens these demons of Vrindavan to the demons in our heart. So he says there's an explanation that there's two different types of Krishna Lila. One is Nitya Lila, activities and pastimes which Krishna performs on a daily basis. They continue their eternal activities. So they may be, for example, Krishna waking up and getting dressed by his parents, and then his parents waving him farewell as he goes and meets his friends and goes to the fields to graze the cows, and then his nocturnal activities with the gopis. All these are eternal lila. So this is one type. Another type of activity is the Naimitika Lila, which are occasional pastimes, which happen from time to time. And, for example, the demons are an example of those activities which happen from time to time, occasional pastimes. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that on the stage of when one is a sadhaka, when one is a practicing devotee, he should actually focus on the Naimitika Lila, those occasional pastimes, and in particular the pastimes of Krishna killing the demons. So, for example, Putana, the nurse, she represents the pseudo-guru, one who may be acting as someone who's advanced in Krishna consciousness, but who's actually not. So by praying to Krishna, praying and meditating on the pastime of Krishna killing Putana, we can defeat this mentality, this mood within our hearts. Trinavarta, the whirlwind demon, he represents false pride. Pralambasura represents lusty inclinations. So by praying to these pastimes, praying to Krishna to purify us and meditating on these pastimes, we can actually purify our tendency for these negative activities. So it's understood, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains that before we engage in chanting, for example, we should pray for the demons within our heart, which are represented by these pastimes, to be defeated. And through this, Krishna will have his mercy, and he will kill these demons in our heart. Also we see that in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains that there's 4 impure motives for devotion. There's 4 different types of people who come to him. So Krishna explains, Chaturvidha bhajante mam jana sukritino arjuna, artho jigyasur artharthi, jnani cha bharatarshava. So Krishna explains that there's 4 kinds of pious men who come to him. The first is the artha, he who is distressed. So if an individual is distressed in life, if they are undergoing some purification, if you like, then he may turn to Krishna. Can anyone think of someone in the scriptures who is an example of someone who's distressed and turns to the Lord for help? Gajendra, yes. So Gajendra, the elephant, is a classic example of someone who's very distressed, but who turns to the Lord for help. And he comes with impure motive, but through practicing, through praying, and through yearning for the Lord, his impurities are purified. Then the Jigyasu, the inquisitive, those who don't know the absolute, but are inquisitive as to what is the nature of spirit, what is the true nature of matter, who are we and what are we doing here. Those who are inquisitive, this is the second type of person who comes to the Lord. Can anyone say some personalities maybe who are inquisitive and come to the Lord? The Kumaras? No? Sorry? Lord Brahma? Possibly, I suppose. The classic example given here is the sages of Naimisharanya. So it's understood that actually they're of different grades of devotion, the sages of Naimisharanya. But generally speaking, they're pious individuals, but they don't know the absolute truth. They don't know the essence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But through hearing Bhagavatam from the lotus lips of Shukadev Goswami, they were actually purified. The third type are the artha-arthi, who are those who desire material gain. So some come to the Lord and are actually praying for material gain, so for some material benefit. And they come to the Lord, surrender unto the Lord in that way, and over time are purified. And there's a classic example of the artha-arthi, which is Dhruv Maharaj, absolutely. So Dhruv Maharaj comes and he desires a kingdom which is greater than Lord Brahma's, his great-grandfather. So he desires this material benefit, but through his practice, in only 6 months, he gains perfection, and actually is very upset to have desired such material activity. The fourth are the jnani. So these are individuals who may renounce the world in order to search for the truth. So they have a degree of renunciation, and they're really searching very deeply to know more about the absolute truth. And they are the Kumaras. An example of those are the Kumaras, the Jnanis. So Krishna actually, he glorifies the Jnanis because they actually have a more specific desire to know him. But having said that, all of them come with an impure motive, but through the process of devotion, they become very much purified. So we understand that this process of devotion, of devotional service, is very strong. So even though we may find ourselves to be in a situation, in a position where we have impure faith, we have impure motive, we have to have faith and a deep understanding that through this process of Krishna consciousness, it is all purifying, and it will help us essentially and eventually to come to a stage of pure devotional service unto the Lord. And I just want to finish with a quote which I was reading just a few days ago. I was reading Bhagavatam and a quote from Prabhupada, just one line, but it really hit me, and it was just powerful to just meditate on it. But Prabhupada instills this faith of pure devotion in us. He says, if we persistently engage in devotional service, certainly all our desires will be fulfilled in due course of time. And of course, Prabhupada is talking about our spiritual desires. But by just engaging in devotional service, all of our desires will be fulfilled in due course of time. So let us pray to Radha Gokulananda that our spiritual desires are all fulfilled. And through this process of devotional service, Bhakti Rasamrita Maharaj was explaining that the impure seeds, or the impure creepers which may develop around our devotional creeper, is roasted. This word roasted by the process of pure devotional service. So it's a very powerful process, and instilling our faith and our effort, our minds, our activities, our everything in this process will really get us to the aim. It's 8:30, but I don't know if there's any questions or comments or corrections from the devotees.